Hey everybody, welcome back and thanks for tuning in. As always, I appreciate the support. Before we get into the repairs and the longer video, I want to say thanks to Jeff. He emailed me some information about this bike and Yamaha bikes in general of the era. And there are several that look pretty much the same, especially to an untrained eye like mine. So it's kind of hard for me to determine what model this bike actually was. In the first video, I thought this bike to be a 1968 Yamaha YG5T Trailmaster 80. Now I believe this bike to be a 1967 Yamaha YL2C Trailmaster 100. So thanks again to Jeff for helping me identify this motorcycle. Now let's get back into the video. We're going to pick up right where we left off last time with this motorcycle. If you remember, the fuel tank was leaking badly on the upper rear and the carburetor was bad. So we're going to start with the fuel tank. I've already got it removed from the bike and I've got some water in it, and it was leaking from back here somewhere. So what I'm going to do now is tip it up and see if we can see where it's leaking from. But besides that leak, the underside of the tank really looks nice. I was expecting to see a bunch of rust and pinholes and things, but it looks pretty good except for the leak, and it seems like it's coming from right underneath this bracket. So we're gonna lift it up. I mean, that is a major leak. Let's see if I can get a close-up for you. This is pretty obvious what's going on. You see that hole right there? Doesn't get much more obvious than that. It looks like this tab was spot welded to the tank, and over time that just vibrated loose and took the metal with it. So now, how do we fix this? See how it's loose like that? Because it came off. Now here you can see on top of the bracket a little bit better those outlines of plug welds. But what do we do? How do we fix this? Maybe if I can get it to come off all the way, I can fix those holes and then tack weld it on the sides. That might be one way to do it. Yeah, there we go. Just two welds that came loose. And like I said, the rest of the tank looks really good. So although this is not good news necessarily, it's better than I thought it was going to be. I thought we were going to find a bunch of rot back here. Well, I think this tank might be thick enough to weld. I've got it all cleaned up and ground down there in that spot, and I've got the bracket also cleaned up. I think I'll dimple these in a little bit so there's a little bit of a concave to them, and then I'll see if I can weld them. Well, I've got a little change in plans here. When I dimpled this front one, it split around the hole. The metal is thinner there than I thought it was, which is probably a blessing in disguise, because I may have really messed this up if I tried to weld it and just blew the metal away. So we're going with plan B. All right, here's plan B. This is a product called JB Tank Weld. It's made specifically, supposedly, for gas tanks. It's got the epoxy and the hardener. Mix them together along with some fiberglass mesh. And we're going to cut this piece in half. It says to, make sure your surface is clean, and it says if it's super smooth, then they want you to rough it up a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do with this 120 grit. I've seen some other guys do this and they've had success with it, so I figure why not try it. One thing I did learn from watching other people on YouTube is you can't mess around with this stuff. Once you mix these two together, you don't have very long at all before it starts to get hard. So the instructions say to put the resin on first, and then one of your fiberglass cloths, and then put another coat of the resin on top. So that's what we're going to try. I'm going to squeeze these out individually onto a piece of cardboard and mix them up, and then apply them that way. The instructions said to mix these two together while they were still inside the packets, but other guys were saying that's hard to deal with it that way, so it seems like a better way to do it. So they're mixed. We don't have a lot of time to screw around. Now we're going to put one layer of fiberglass mesh, and then put the rest of this stuff on top. And I still have more in the pack that we can put more on top here if we need. And it looks like I will need to do that. The product says that this stuff is good for holes up to 1/4 inch in diameter, and our holes are much smaller than that. Now what I want to do, I'll show you. Get a good coat of this stuff on here. And then I want to take this piece and place it on top so it kind of gets stuck to everything as well, and it'll sort of act as another layer, if you will, on top of the fiberglass mesh. Now I'm coming out a little far on the sides here. You may notice that is part of step 2, so I'll show you that in a minute. I guess the stuff is going to harden up within 5 minutes or less. So I decided to go ahead with step 2 while the stuff is a little bit tacky. I think it'll be more successful that way. What I'm going to do is just put a couple more cloths this way to, you know, the idea is to keep the bracket held to the tank better than it is. Right now it's just kind of stuck there with a little bit in that hole. But I think if I reinforce it like this, it won't be going anywhere. And this is more traditional fiberglass resin stuff, so this should be perfect over the top of this. This stuff says use 10 drops of hardener to 1 ounce of product. So that's about that. Mix him up. And I'm going to apply this one just dry over the top, and hopefully it will stick a little bit to the sides like I said before, because it's still just a little bit tacky. I want it to sit mostly flat on top. We'll start brushing this stuff on. When I get this all done, I'll go back and trim up all the loose strands and stuff like that. So we'll put our second layer on top. Okay, nothing to do now but wait for it to set up. You can see where the legs of the bracket will still fit inside the slots. because that's how it keeps the tank down in the rear. There's a bracket on the bike. While we're waiting on that stuff to dry on the tank, let's see if we can get this new ignition switch installed. Came with 2 keys and it looks to be the right one. The challenge will be, of course, to get the wires hooked up correctly because I don't know what goes to where. Wow, the switch was completely gutted for some reason. So the new ignition switch has a blue wire, a red wire, and a brown wire. And on the bike we have a blue wire, a red wire, and a brown wire. Could it be that simple? This is also red, so what I'm going to do is hook up all 3 reds together and then the blue and brown and see if we might just get lucky on the first try. I'm going to use my little favorite little terminal crimpers here. These are perfect for temporary applications and even some permanent applications because you can take them on and off easily without ruining the wires or anything. A lot of times on tractors, if I'm using these for wiring or lights or whatever the wiring might be, I usually just leave them on there because there's nothing wrong with them being permanent either. All right, the battery is connected to the bike. The new switch is connected to the bike. And let's see what happens here. Right now nothing is on, neither the headlight nor the lights on the speedometer. So I'm going to turn it to the first position here. Let's see, first position. Now I got lights on the dash. Let's go to the second position. Still got lights on the dash, and now we have a headlight. I guess the only way to know for sure is to take the spark plug out and kick it over and see if we have spark with the key off and then in position number 1 and position number 2. Well, I'm not sure if you guys are going to be able to see this out here in the light, but I'll let you know what goes on. Right now the key is off and I'm going to kick it over. No spark. Turn the key to the first position. Oh yeah, I'll be darned. The dash lights came on and we got good spark. Now I'm going to go second position. Now the headlights and the dash lights are on. And we still have a good spark. Turn it back to the off position. No spark. So everything works except for the tail light, and I did put a new bulb in there. And I noticed we have 2 wires that are not hooked up to anything. We have a green one and a brown one. So I'm going to attempt one by one to wire these into the headlight circuit. And I wonder if one's a brake light and one's a tail light. Let me step on the brakes. Ah, son of a gun. Look at this. The brake light actually works when I step on the rear brakes. Wow. Okay, well that changes things. Let's leave that where it is. Well, I still haven't figured out the taillight circuit yet, but you guys will not believe what I just found on this bike. All right, key to the first position. You gotta be kidding me. This whole time, I must have kick-started this thing 100 times with my foot in that last video. And it's got an electric starter that works. I've got the spark plug out right now. So I'm gonna plug the spark plug back in and see if it's got enough juice to crank it over with the spark plug in with compression. but that just blew me away. This thing clips onto the bottom. There's a little slot in the bottom of it with a clip on the bike. Put it over that clip and then on like that. And the only thing I have at the moment, see, that doesn't even work. I need to get something that's going to hold it on up here. I guess I'll just put this nut on here for now so it won't literally fall off the bike, and then we can stuff the dongle in here. And then attach the battery charger like that. Yeah, that'll work. Then when we're not using the battery charger, I can stuff it up in the hole or something like that. I'll figure something out for that later. Well, I've just got a jimmy rigged on there for the moment. I'll find something better at the hardware store perhaps, but at least it will hold it on the bike while we're working on other stuff. So I've got the battery charger plugged in, and we'll come back in a little while and see if the stinking electric starter will turn this thing over with the spark plug in. Well, coming back over here, both of our fiberglasses have set up nice and hard. And if we come over here to the tank, it's nice and hard over here too. I'm just going to trim off some of these frayed ends here. So now looking from the front, you can see the passages where our little bracket will go. They look to be nice and clear. So we're going to let this thing sit overnight. I think the instructions for the tank weld stuff said to let it sit for 4 hours, but I'm going to let it sit overnight. And we'll come back tomorrow and put some gasoline in it, and fingers crossed it won't leak. All right, let's try this starter. I can't believe it even has a starter, let alone that it works. That was a huge surprise to me. So let's turn it to the first position. We get our dash lights. So ignition is on. And just for fun, let's see if I can squirt some gas down into our dead carburetor. All right, key on, starter engage. Unbelievable. Well, I don't get excited about too many things, but this is exciting. I didn't even know it had a starter. The starter still works. The bike started immediately with just a push of the button. That's just, it amazes me. And the other thing that amazes me is that the brake light still works with the rear brake pedal. The only thing that we don't have is a tail light right now, but we can work on that another time. But overall, our new ignition switch and this wiring was a huge victory. So I found this knob at the local hardware store. Of course, it doesn't have the right size insert, it's way too small. And then I found this, which is like a coupling type of nut. And I think if I drill this out and cut this down, I can jam this in there, perhaps glue it in there, and make a nice hand knob out of this. So to get this insert out, I think I'm just going to use a skinny Christmas tree bit, and see if I can just drill it out. Yeah, this is working. You can see it's about halfway out already, so it should just come out now the rest of the way. There we go. All right, insert removed. That's step number one. Step number two, I have to incrementally make this hole large enough to fit over the ignition switch post. Gotta go a little bit bigger. Yeah, this fits now over the ignition switch post. Now it's just a matter of getting our insert inside this thing. I need to take a little bit of material off the outside of this thing, and then we can get it in there. All right, here's what I've got so far. You can see what I'm trying to accomplish, I think. I'm trying to get this driven pretty much all the way to the top of this knob, maybe just a little bit below it, and then cut off the rest. So I'm just trying to make the opening in this plastic knob large enough to accept this, and then we'll glue it in there. So I'm going to cut it right at this line, because we don't need very much of this, and then we can insert it into the knob. So I got the piece sliced off and smoothed out and ready to go. And you might be wondering why I had such a long piece and then cut it so short. I could have used just a regular nut, but my original plan was to use a longer section of this, and then when I started going on it and look at the knob, I thought that a thinner section would work better. So that's why I had this in the first place. So I'm going to drive this into the knob. Okay, here's the final product. Modified a washer to fit on over the shaft like that, and then our knob that we made goes on next. This all gets tightened down. Put the key in, first position, second, first, off. Now this thing is nice and secure on here. It was driving me crazy when it was rattling around and wanting to fall off. So this was a good thing to get done. Cost about $10 for the plastic knob and that big nut. Hey, good morning. Today's going to be another exciting day on this motorcycle. I've got the replacement carburetor coming in the mail, and first thing we're going to do is check out this gas tank, see if our repair was successful or not. Fiberglass set up hard as a rock. I'm happy with the way it turned out. Should we put water in here first or just go straight to gasoline? I'm going to test it with water first, mainly because we have to have this hose attached to the bottom. I think this must be some part of the reserve fuel system. And this thing has to be on here because fuel flows through this, or at least it sits in there. So we're going to fill this up with water, and then we'll have to drain it, take the hose off, and then put it on the bike before we put gas in it. So I've got the tank flipped around so it's going downhill a little bit, but I want to put a block underneath this end so it's really going downhill, because that's the end of the tank that the leak was on over here. So I'm going to leave this here most of the day. I'll come back and check on it later this afternoon. I don't really anticipate any leaks because our holes were small, and I feel pretty confident about the way I got that product applied. I would be surprised if it leaks, but you never know with these things. So we'll find out later this afternoon. The chances of me finding a replacement air filter like this is about 0. So I have an idea that maybe we can use the housing of this old filter and put a new element in it, because it fits perfectly. It's original to the bike. I don't want to just wad up some foam, you know, and stick it in there. I want this to kind of look right. So well, it looks like this whole thing is just glued together. Yeah, just get this old stuff off, and then I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to glue a new element on there, and we'll glue the side back on, and that should be all it needs. All right, I've got the piece disassembled and cleaned up satisfactorily. Now we're going to glue this whole thing back together and then glue the element in when this is all dry. I've got some 5-minute epoxy here, but it's a little bit cold this morning, so I can't get it to come out. So I'm going to try to heat it up. I feel like this video should be titled Arts and Crafts. This is the hardener. This is, you know, you can get this kind of glue at any hardware store, but it's really strong. You don't have a whole lot of time to work with it, but then when it sets up, you know, it's good. It's pretty much permanent. I don't use it very often, but every once in a while you need stuff like this because regular household glue isn't going to do the trick. So the next thing I want to do is get this old carburetor removed in preparation for the replacement one that should be here in the mail pretty soon. Now this is a little bit strange to me. So we look at the front of the handlebars. The handle on the right is front brakes and they work. The handle on the left is clutch. Well, this bike also has a third handle. It's broken off right here. I've got one coming in the mail. But this I thought might be an additional front brake, but it's not. It's the second cable that runs into the carburetor. Now, the other one that runs into the carburetor is the primary throttle cable that operates off, you know, the twist handle. But this other cable comes up to this handle that is missing, and I think this might be a secondary throttle handle. So the primary throttle cable that comes off the twist handle runs into this deal here, and it's got some kind of a mechanism in there or a connection that allows two cables to come out the other side. So you pull on, you know, just one cable on this side, but it actually operates two. One of those cables goes down to the primary throttle on the carburetor. The other one goes down to the oil feed mechanism. And then the second cable over here near that is the clutch cable. So how does this carburetor, oh, I see there's a nut back in there. So I know that the replacement carburetor I ordered does come with cables, but I don't know how far they go up. I don't know if it includes this thing or not. I'm not sure about this, and I don't want to be cutting things before I know what a replacement part looks like. I guess the only thing I can do for the moment until that comes is figure out how it attaches up here to the handle. I know it goes through this piece and then up inside the handle to the, you know, to the throttle grip. But it looks to me like we might have to split this grip housing to get that out and get a new one in there. There it is. Aha. Oh, she jumped right out of there. Well, that's straightforward enough. You slide it in there and then hook it through that slot and then run it through that hole, of course, down there. So we'll leave that apart like that and wait for the new one to arrive. And as long as I'm in here, I'm going to install a new fuel line. This one is pretty old. Even though it was not leaking, it's one of those things that, you know, as long as we're in here, let's go ahead and replace it because it's pretty hard. And if everything else works, this would be the weak link in our chain. So the new line goes through the air filter bracket on both sides. Now it gets routed down through that boot. I'm actually going to get some WD-40 for that. And there it is. I made it a little bit longer than necessary so we could trim it off because you don't want to make them too short. And then of course on the other side, it has to be long enough to extend up to the bottom of the fuel valve. So we'll leave it long on this side too until we put everything back together. While I'm waiting for the carburetor to arrive, I'm going to diagnose this taillight circuit if I can. I did get the new bulb in the mail, dual filament, and it's a short, squatty guy because the regular length bulb was, you know, kind of barely touches the inside of the reflector, and we don't want that. So I'm going to try to split this wire sheath just to determine what color wires we have back here. It looks like we have blue and yellow. Now, I don't remember seeing a yellow wire up front. So let's go investigate our wire cluster up there and see if we can find a yellow one. Love this knob. Okay. Actually, I do see a yellow one up there. How did we not notice that one before? The real question is it connected to anything? Well, I had to go off camera there for a while. What I had to do was remove the battery and completely undo all these wires and get up in there because there were two wires up in there. The yellow one had come disconnected. So that had to have been the brake light because the brake light wasn't working anymore. I reconnected the yellow, and then the only one left way back up in there was a blue one that wasn't connected to anything. So I had to lengthen that wire, and then I just ran it to our blue circuit, if you will, the light circuit, and the tail light works now and the brake light. So let me show you. So first, second, we get headlight and tail light. How about that? And we still have the brake light. So let me put this lens on and see how bright it looks with the lens on. Tail light first. Tail light on. Yeah, actually looks pretty good. And brakes. And off. Well, could not get the horn to work. So as far as the wiring goes, we're gonna stop there. I don't even know if the horn is good or not. But besides the horn, all the electrical system works now. Couldn't be happier with that. The rebuilt carburetor arrived in the mail. I'm all set to get it installed, except it's the wrong one. It's just a little bit smaller. It's just not going to fit, so I'm going to have to return this, and we're going to have to try to rebuild this one. The air filter assembly turned out great. It's stronger probably than it was before. So now I just have to glue the element on there and this will be ready. But I was hoping we weren't going to have to get into this. Maybe it will be easier than I think. I think the float is definitely stuck, and I know the throttle was stuck. It's supposed to go up and down, and it was, I could barely get it out, prying it with a screwdriver. And then I'm going to have to fix that broken throttle cable. And I'm happy to report that our tank is completely dry. No leaks at all. So I'm going to empty this out, let it sit open all night, and hopefully all the water will evaporate out of there and it'll be ready to put back on the bike. All right, I can't put this off any longer. We got to crack this carburetor apart and see what's going on. I'm guessing it's probably the float and the needle are stuck. I used to not mind working on carburetors, but in the last couple of years I just have not been very successful at it for one reason or another. And so I think wiring has jumped ahead of carburetors on my list. It would be nice if we can save this one, because then we have minimal work to do on the cables that are on the bike. If we get a different carburetor and we have to put new cables on there, that would be a challenge to say the least. And because this bike hasn't been, ran in 20 years, I'm sure this is all just stuck in here and I can't even get the bowl off with the screws out. Oh boy, she is shellacked. And the needle is sticking, but it's not completely stuck. Well, I take that back. Yeah, it's completely stuck. I can't even get the pin for the float out. Everything's so stuck. And if I break anything in here, I'm oh my goodness. Wow. We'll test the float, make sure it still floats. And here comes the needle. Ooh, it's a tiny little guy. Wow. Look how small that is. Now this gasket, I don't know. That's what happens when paper becomes petrified. Well, that's not going to be an easy one to make, but I'll have to work on that. I'll try a G electric guitar string here. Oh man. Yeah, that one was plugged at the very tip. You know what? I'm not even going to mess with that. We're just going to put it in ultrasonic cleaner. And then when it's all done, we'll check all the passageways. All right, in they go. And the float is good, by the way. It floats and there's no, there's no leaks or pinholes or anything. So that's really good news. So we'll let that float around in there. This is going to be a tedious gasket to fabricate, but I will do my best. Uh-huh. All right, there's the rough cut. Now I got to trim it up a little bit and punch the holes. All right, here's what I got so far. And if you put it over the top of the old one, pretty much lines up with everything, and flip it over. Same thing, pretty much lines up. So this is going to be good enough to start with. If it drops right in, great. If we have to trim it some more, then we'll trim it some more. All right, here are the pieces out of the cleaner. That was about 20 minutes. Sometimes 20 minutes is all it takes. Sometimes I'll let them go for an hour. Guess it just depends on how dirty they are. All right, we've got the needle reinserted in the seat. I think all the passageways are clean. I blew them out with air, and I blew them out with brake clean, and I had to trim this gasket in a couple of places, but it ended up fitting very nicely. So let's see, ready to put the float back on. All right, we now have a functioning needle and float again. So I'm going to put this back together, and we'll keep our fingers crossed on this one. So I've got the carburetor done and ready to install. But before I do that, I need to investigate this oil feed mechanism. Well, there's wet oil on this banjo bolt thing. Let's take this whole thing off. All right, this whole tube should come out. Maybe I can blow some air through there just to make sure that this thing is clear. But I see wet oil coming out of this hole. Well, the oil line that we just removed is free and clear. It's looks like there was oil passing through there. So we still want to investigate what's going on behind here. All right. Oh boy, here comes some oil. This line that's attached to the back of this unit is hard as a rock, and it's difficult to get off. But I want to make sure that we've got oil coming to the motor, you know. If this unit was not working, or if it broke, why couldn't a guy just run premix in the gas tank and then disable this thing? Maybe somebody out there smarter than me can let me know that. But we are definitely getting oil from the reservoir. We're getting oil to our unit here, which is really good. So this unit is functioning properly, and we're gonna put it back in. All right, I've got the oil feed mechanism all reinstalled and ready to go. Lines hooked up to the engine. I think that's all working and going to work. This throttle cylinder only goes in one way. There's a little nipple inside there that that slot fits into. We can do that after I get the thing mounted. Now, if you remember when I took the carburetor off, I mentioned how hard it was to get to that nut back in there. Well, you don't have to do that at all. Over here, there's a plug, rubber plug that was still there, and I took it out. Then you just stick a screwdriver through there and tighten the clamp that way. What a concept, huh? How easy is that? So if you remember before, the carburetor was not doing anything. It was completely stuck and it was overflowing with fuel. Well, now watch what happens when I pull the throttle cable. That's what's supposed to happen. That's throttle open, that's closed, open, closed. So I've got the fuel valve on right now, so we're getting fuel to the carburetor and it is not leaking. So that means our float and needle clean and repair was a success, because the float must be working now. Now, although the throttle cable is still broken, we have that to fix next. I can operate it by pulling on it. So if the bike starts up and runs, then we can throttle it up and throttle it down. So if the engine starts and continues to run, that means the carburetor repair was a success. I might have to prime it a couple of times to get it going, I'm not sure. There's probably some residual oil in there from me lubing things up on the throttle. But I'll give it a shot with no prime, and then if we have to, we'll prime it. And if it starts up, I'll pull the throttle cable and see if we can get it to rev up. Key on, and here we go. Oh, that's good news. It started without a prime. Well, my friends, I finally got the carburetor to work correctly. Oh my goodness, that was a fight. I'll show you the carburetor in just a second. I still don't have the throttle cable fixed yet, so I got to kind of reach down there and pull on the cable with my hand. But I am excited that I finally got this carburetor dialed in. It does have gear oil. It's a little bit low, but there's plenty in there to run the bike, so we'll leave that as it is for now. A couple things here. So I got it running off camera and I was able to verify 100% that we are getting oil feed into the crankcase. After I removed that line, blew it out and put it back on, and then started the bike again, I saw oil start to flow, and at first there were some air bubbles, but then it purged itself and it's all 100% oil now. So that is amazing that that thing is working. The carburetor's got two input ports on top here, side by side. That in itself confused me. The back one is the fuel inlet. This is the air fuel mix screw. I turned that all the way in and then backed it out about 1 1/4 revolutions, and that seems to be pretty good. The bike is idling and it accelerates like it should. I did take the carburetor off again just a little bit ago and removed the idle jet from the middle of the carburetor and blew it out and poked some wires through the holes and everything, make sure everything was clear. The main passageway in there was actually blocked, and I think that was the key to getting this thing to run right. Anyway, for right now, I'm going to leave the side cover off, and we still don't have the air filter completed yet. And like I said before, the throttle cable is still not fixed. And in addition to that, we have a questionable gear selector over here. It's pretty loose on the peg down there, and it seems like it's kind of hard to select gears. So we'll see what I can make happen there. Off camera, this thing started immediately just like it did earlier, just with a push of the button. So I hope it does that again for you so you can see it. So key on. Well, after all that work, I could not be happier. If you missed the first video, this is an honest to God barn find. The previous owner had it in their barn for, they said, at least 15 to 20 years, and they hadn't touched it. Luckily, it was parked inside, which is evident just by looking at the bike and also me working on it. There's not a lot of rust on the bike. There's a little bit of pitting on the chrome on the springs and things like that, but overall, it's not much rust. Even on the underside of the tank, which I was really surprised, it looked really good under there. So I think this bike was well cared for, and then I think it was parked pretty early on in its life. You know, it might have been 1977 or a few years after that, who knows. But I think it's been parked in a barn for a very long time in a dry environment. You know, it had a bunch of things wrong with it, but my guess as far as why it was parked is probably the gas tank. That was a major leak, and that would be a good reason for a bike to get parked. Sometimes I have to remind myself that not everybody has the patience for these kind of repair jobs, or the skills or the tools. You know, some people get a motorcycle and if it breaks, they take it to a shop or push it in a corner. So 20 years later, I come along and snag it up and hope that I'm not just buying a two-wheeled paperweight. But this is turning out to be everything I would hope for in a barn find. You know, the motor's good. I'm pretty sure the transmission is good. It's just the gear selector, it's not working right because it's twisting on the post. So I'm not sure what we're gonna do about that, if those teeth are stripped or what. I mean, I guess I could weld it on there, but I'd rather not do that. So anyway, I'll think about that for the future. The wiring was all pretty straightforward except for the tail light. If you remember, the tail light wasn't working, but the brake light was. And then I gutted the wiring and looked up inside the bike, and there was a wire, and a blue wire up in there that wasn't connected to anything, and it was very short too. So it looked like at some point that connector had pulled out of the blue wire, and nobody ever reconnected it. So once I got that figured out, all the wiring works, including the electric starter, which I didn't even know it had. I'll have at least one more video on this bike when I get everything done and buttoned up and ready to go, and then I'll be able to ride the bike with two hands. Anyway, that's a wrap. I'll say so long for now. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. Check out antiquecarsandstuff.com, and hope to see you guys on the next video. Take care now.